Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Spivey. I'm here with Evan Papp from USAID, from Power Africa. And we're going to talk about a few videos today that Evan created and a few websites that he created as well, and dive in a little deeper into that project and some of the other things that he's working on as well at Power Africa. So Power Africa is it's a really great organization that you could probably describe it better than me, but it's one of the most vast organizations of its kind, right?
Yes, Power Africa was created in 2013, and it's a whole of government approach to be able to increase electrical generation and transmission in Africa. And whole of government essentially is Power Africa's coordinator's office is the go-to point that private sector can knock on our doors and then get access to 12 government agencies, everything from Commerce to USTDA to OPIC, to State Department to MCC to USADF, and they knock on our door, and then we work with the private sector to drive transactions in sub-Saharan Africa.
Right. So at Power Africa, Evan is basically the strategic guru working on everything digital with public affairs and outreach. And so he has his hand in a lot of the communication efforts of the organization. It's a pretty substantive, large organization with more than $54 billion towards achieving Power Africa's goal of 30,000 megawatts and 60 million new connections, which is the world's largest public-private partnership, which is among the world's largest public-private partnerships in development history. I got that all out.
You did.
It's yeah. So tell us a little bit about before you joined USAID. What's your background?
So my background, I was undergrad at University of Michigan a long time ago, studying political science and philosophy, and traveled a bit after college and ended up going into the Peace Corps. I was in Zambia, which is based in Southern Africa, and I was doing distance education through the radio, and a very rural situation with no electricity, no running water, and it was my first experience really living off grid amongst a lot of people who want to be on the grid. I came to DC after that to talk about my experience with the Peace Corps as an outreach and recruitment specialist, and then went back into a short-term Peace Corps experience within Jamaica, focusing on ambulance equipment training. And then after that, went to University of Maryland School of Public Policy, and been taking a lot of video classes at night during that time, and then ended up getting into USAID, Africa Bureau. And the video we're going to be presenting today is during my time with the Democracy, Conflict, Humanitarian Assistance Bureau.
Right. So it seems like Power Africa is a natural fit for you as far as your interest in, international things going on. And it's amazing that you've been able to teach yourself as much as you have from filmmaking, and also considering how you have your hands in so many things digital when it comes to communication. But let's go ahead and dive into the main project that we're going to discuss today. First, we're going to watch a video, which is part of a larger campaign that Evan created. And Evan, go ahead, tell us about this video before we watch it.
Yeah, so I'm in the Humanitarian Assistance and Conflict Bureau. I was working in a specific office looking at conflict and crisis called Office of Transition Initiatives. And during that time, we had a program in Cote d'Ivoire, which is based in West Africa. And there was an election coming up in October 2015. And so just a little bit of background, the last election was in 2010, 2011, and there was a lot of fighting before. There was questions on the count of the vote, and it led to a civil war. And so leading up to this election, the office that I was working for was doing numerous activities to try to bring together many different groups that were fighting in the civil war, to have dialogue, and to also really emphasize the need for peace and reconciliation, and getting through the election peacefully. And so this video is about that.
Who came up with the idea for the video, the concept?
So the concept was obviously a group effort. I do want to give a shout out to Kendra Helmer, and I'll talk a little bit more about her work on the Story Hub page. She's a photographer, and I was working closely with her in OTI, the office I was in. And then there were a couple of folks on the ground in Cote d'Ivoire, Parker Bennett and Mark Emmert, who also was presenting different types of activities that we could cover around the election. And so when we were sent to the field, there was about 3 or 4 videos that we were supposed to produce, and this is the one that really stood out because of the main character, Ako Ehsan Emil. Right. And so from that, Ako's story, looking at the main component of the program of this getting out the vote campaign and peaceful dialogues, and then from that we started storyboarding.
And executing the video. When you went there to shoot it, how did you execute? What did the production look like in post-production?
Well, maybe we should run through the video a little bit.
You know, watch it first.
Yeah, let's okay. Jump in right now. So,
okay,
and then we can talk a little bit about the post.
So we're gonna go ahead and share the video in the chat here, and then let's see.
Attendons mon frère pour les élections, attendons ma soeur pour les élections, politiciens, non, 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 voilà. La guerre civile, non, 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 voilà. Well, welcome to Radio Arc-en-Ciel. This is the community radio station of the urban area of Abobo. My name is Ako Ehsan Emil. I'm 28 years old. Broadly, I'm a host of many varieties of programs. Cote d'Ivoire is a country with 22 million people. It's the land of chocolates because we are the first producer of cocoa beans and the first exporter of cocoa beans. So it's also a land of artists. Many great singers come from Cote d'Ivoire, and even there is a tribe in Cote d'Ivoire who claimed Michael Jackson as being their son. So I'm part of this tribe. So Michael Jackson was my cousin. I grew up in the village. I didn't know anything about the city. So I was dreaming in my childhood to one day come to the city and see what the city looks like. There was shooting everywhere. So many battles went on in this area where many people lost their lives. What we do is to go into the community with canopies, chairs, and then a sound system to run a public radio show. And then when people come, we held a round table where we call community leaders, women leaders, youth leaders, and elders to come, and then they discuss a topic. During the program, the populations raise some of the issues they are confronted with. They don't have good roads, they don't have infrastructure, they don't have health centers, they don't have water supplies, they don't have electricity supplies also. So many issues they are confronted with. But currently, the priority is about a peaceful election. Once we have secured peace during these elections, then we could be able to talk about development and infrastructure. We have been walking around the street to do suicide interviews because our focus is to also to convey the message of peaceful election in local languages. Cote d'Ivoire has about 70 local languages. Almost all these languages are represented in our area, which has about 1,500,000 people. So we just give them the platform to tell to the population that we need peace. We need a peaceful election. We need peaceful electoral process. And then we come back to the radio station and we edit the sounds. If it's good, then we broadcast it on air. And we make radio pieces of about 1 minute, and we broadcast them during these radio talk shows. I'm not paid for the job I do. Everybody here is doing it on a volunteering basis. There's so many issues we are confronted with in the community that at a given time you have to serve your community, and that's what we are doing. Dieu du Nord, Dieu du Sud, Dieu du Centre, allons tous à la paix, oh, hey. Politiciens, non, non, on veut la paix.
All right.
Yeah, so there it is. So obviously, I think one of the most important things to go to shoot something like this is to do a lot of research, to understand the dynamics behind the conflict, understand what the programming is around to promote peaceful elections, and then identify charismatic individuals that you can shoot. So this video is part of the USAID Storytelling Hub that really focuses on kind of the hero's journey. And Ako is just an amazing talent to put on screen, and he's very articulate. And Côte d'Ivoire's main national language is French, and he speaks really good English as well. So that can resonate with a lot of audiences. So when we were looking at the pre-production, we obviously wanted to look at some places where there was a lot of conflict during the Civil War. So the Gulf Hotel in Abidjan, the presidential palace, some of the different marketplaces, some of the neighborhoods in Yapogan and Abobo. So we were looking at all of those places. And then at the same time, since we had additional videos to shoot, we went to the west of the country in Jokwe and Dalawa, which are right on the border of Liberia, and was able to get some more B-rolls that we were able to splice from kind of shooting a different segment of videos for this video as well. And then Ako was extremely gracious in opening up his house to focus on how he lived at home, where he came from. We spent a long time in church with him, where a back part of the story that unfortunately got cut out of this video was a 2-minute segment of how he learned English really well. And after he had to leave the university after the conflict. And from that, he went to a church and was able to start translating a lot of the French or English religious text into the local language and into French as well. And that got him into becoming a very proficient translator. And we spent a lot of time in church and had this great church scene, but it just didn't make the cut, unfortunately. But he opened up his world, and then on that day we walked around with him all day in Abobo for this event that was talking about community reconciliation, and where he was going around doing many different interviews for people. And then we went to Radio Arc-en-Ciel, and that's where we got a lot of the footage of the radio station.
How did you find him?
I'm still in touch with Ako. He's an amazing guy.
But how did you actually find him?
So it was the people, actually, the USAID folks on the ground working on programs within Côte d'Ivoire. He was given, Radio Arc-en-Ciel was given a grant to promote peaceful dialogue, and he's just one of those superstars at this community radio station that was really able to run with it. And so working with the folks on the ground to identify individuals that we could shoot a story around, Ako naturally rose to the top.
Utilizing your resources.
Absolutely.
Did anyone speak French, or was there any issue with language barrier when you're traveling? Like, what kind of challenges did you experience when you were trying to navigate?
Yeah, so my French skills are limited to non-existent, but we also had a very great translator. This guy, Victor Odi, is also a very good person. And he was able to translate very well. And then Ako, we were working through a lot of the English. the challenge is obviously in shooting a lot of these places is being able to charge your gear, being able to make sure that all your lenses are clean and things like that. And I was even conducting one of the interviews and shooting at the same time. And you can even see there's a little out of focus with the radio Arkansas and Akko is a little out of focus in that end. So those are definitely some of the challenges you face when you're just kind of shooting on the fly. And going into this, we had an old JVC camera with a dual audio. It's like 1080p and didn't get great audio. So I brought my own Zoom 4N essentially, a Sennheiser mic, and then even something like a Rebel Canon to even shoot some of this. So really kind of low budget in getting it out there, and shot a little bit with the JVC as well.
Did you have anyone helping you shoot?
No, it was all me. And
Wow.
Kendra was doing a great job taking photos as well during that time. So.
That's tough. Did you have another person there to help you like interview people, or?
Kendra helped interview some of them, and I was also kind of shooting and interviewing as well.
So photographer, shooting video at the same time, just trading responsibilities.
Yes, yeah. So we were definitely a team on that.
Were there any challenges traveling with your gear internationally, checking your gear, carrying on? Any issues with that?
There was some. Kendra as well brought a lot of her professional photography gear because her background is as a journalist before coming to USAID. And she has insurance on it, but when she had to check it in, she was kind of having a lot of grief on that flight, wondering if the camera gear would appear when we arrived in Cote d'Ivoire.
You weren't allowed to carry it on? You had to check it?
Well, I was able to carry it on because I didn't have as much gear with me as Kendra did. So she had to check it in. But
that's scary, especially if you got to check your camera.
Yeah, but we got through. She kept her main camera. Obviously, you want to at least have something when you get to the ground in case your luggage gets lost. But that's always a concern.
So when you edited this, right?
Yes. Okay.
So I'm just curious what the thought process was behind the decision not to include music.
So when I first edited it, and I was using Final Cut Pro for this one, and use Adobe Premiere as well for some of the videos that I'm doing on the side. There was a church scene with a lot of music going on, and that kind of was in the middle. And I wanted to keep a very somber kind of tone in the beginning of it, as it talks about civil war and some of these other things, and just kind of keeping that space with the silence, I think is really important. Unfortunately, with the cut from the church, it does kind of keep like a very kind of quiet, almost somber tone without the music on and without the score behind it.
I think it's really good. It has a very real, authentic feel.
Thanks.
And whenever I talk to people about editing or younger editors, I primarily tell them that if you're thinking about different ways to edit in the most basic sense, there's basically two ways to edit. You're either editing the music and beats, or you're editing to the content. And a lot of the times, the most dynamic edits that you would see on TV or the most advanced documentaries or whatever it is, it's a combination of both of those things. And a lot of the times, someone will edit a video without any music first. And then if they want to take it to the next level, they would edit it with music, and then it would be a combination of the two. But so many people rely on music when they edit that it's almost impossible for them to think of editing without it. Okay. So I think that's it's a confident decision that you made, and not many people do that. People usually rely on music as a crutch. And it's a really difficult thing to do. Even though the edit may seem simple, you have to think about things differently when you're editing without music. So it was cool to see that you were willing to do that. Do you want to talk about your website? That
yeah, let's go through the USAID Story Hub.
I'll go ahead and share this link. Share the screen. And I'll let you go ahead and navigate this.
Great. Yeah, so this is a story hub that USAID really brought in to kind of drive a more visual narrative structure. And the DAA, the Deputy Assistant Administrator at that time, was Stephanie Bluma, and Kelly Raimondo was one of the main editors for this site during that time, and Greg Yor is the internet director and digital director who's still at the agency, who helped move this forward as well.
So what was your involvement in this site?
So in this site was just putting up some of the content. So USAID is very contractor heavy, and most of the filming being done by USAID is through the contract. So this was actually the first one done with some internal shooter like myself. So that was definitely a unique kind of opportunity. And so within this framework, it goes right into the video as we saw, and then it goes into.
So can you describe a little bit about just the overall concept and layout of this site? Because a lot of government agencies struggle with getting, a format like this approved, because the whole website experience here is based on a visual experience, right? It's all visual. So tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously, you need leadership to be willing to take a risk and be willing to work through the bureaucracy. You got to make sure that your general counsel's on board. The CIO's office is going to be supporting, along with the legislative public affairs, and ultimately the administration of that organization has to okay it. We had a very forward-leaning front office in our legislative public affairs that was driving this, and they came from the private sector, and they were able to kind of move this through the bureaucracy. As you can see, there's different stories when you hit, you can hit West Africa here. It's Accra story. It's different stories going on around the Ebola in Liberia. You can see what's going on with.
And in the federal government, you do not see websites like this very often. So it's really cool that you were able to really, actualize such a large project like this around visual elements.
So many different videos along with these stories as well.
Well, why was it so important to focus on pictures and the visual? Overall, why was that so important?
It absolutely engages the audience, and oftentimes the technical folks in the programs and even the policy office, they're going to be writing very long screeds about every little detail of their program and project. For documentation purposes, so that if there is an audit, but also for helping to better program and for iteration and for just tracking of what's going on. But as you can see, the goal of trying to get a lot of eyes on something is lack of attention, frankly, for a lot of public audiences. So if you can get something very bite-sized and very visual, you can engage the audience to some of these shorter reads. So this whole platform, I believe, was launched around 2014 and 2013, 2014. So it was a way to really drive the hero narrative and this visual focus.
Who was the audience for this project?
So the audience, and that's something I'd like to talk a little bit later. So the audience for us within the Democracy Conflict Humanitarian Bureau is to a lot of the niche audiences that are working on conflict and humanitarian assistance, showing that we have impact in these areas where we're working. And Cote d'Ivoire was a fairly open space that we could travel in, and compared to some of the other countries that we were working that are much harder to get out and talk to people. So focusing on the niche audiences, and then I think a very important audience that often gets overlooked within the government is our congressional overseers, essentially the folks who are appropriating our budgets and who are authorizing our policies and programs. So being able to work and share with their staffers some of these videos that we're doing, so that they can share with their member and share with their constituents why they're supporting these programs and why it's actually worth taxpayer money to be funded. So I would say the two audiences are those niche audiences, and then always having Congress in mind. And then, of course, the internal audience, because there's a lot of different government assets and equities doing conflict and peace building, working in West Africa, working in Cote d'Ivoire, and making sure that they're all aware of different types of projects that may be able to be very, very visually told in this type of format. So a lot of these pictures were shot by Kendra Helmer. And as you can see, it's just...
Is she a staff photographer?
She is actually another strategic communicator, but her background was as a photojournalist and as a journalist as well. And so we were able to go to the college and where a lot of the violence took place, get some shots. This is downtown Abidjan, the capital. To the left is where Akko was living at the time. And this is the Radio Arc-en-Ciel. At the college, there was this mural that showed the history of the violence. And so as you can see, and this is some of the church scenes that we got a lot of great video from. Maybe put it into an outtake or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a quick read that's visually engaging with a video perspective as well. And I guess some of the successes from this experience is Africa obviously gets a bad rap. A lot of people in Africa are, you know, just constantly it's under the dark clouds of conflict and poverty. And being able to highlight a story where you have a successful election and with such an engaging personality like Akko, I think that's important for more Americans to see. My experience in Peace Corps was all about trying to understand what the culture is in wherever that Peace Corps volunteer is, and then bringing it back to the US to kind of raise awareness and raise the consciousness of Americans. And I think getting Akko on the video is a way to kind of focus on that as well. I don't know if you want to bring it back to the video, the Google Hangout.
Definitely.
Is it still on the screen share?
No, it turned
Okay.
off. Let's see. You want to tell us about the other videos here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm now in my current position. I work for Power Africa. It's based at USAID and it's coordinated through USAID. And we have a lot of different projects going on all through the continent. And one of the things that we're focusing on is trying to message how we support US jobs and US businesses. So our coordinator, Andrew Herskowitz, went to the Midwest to meet with a lot of these manufacturing companies, some that are partners, some that are potential partners, or just learning about Power Africa. So we were there to talk a little bit about the services and tools that we offer private sector and how to provide market intelligence and to share opportunities so that more US businesses can be exporting to Africa, essentially. And the turnaround was extremely short. We didn't really have a videographer planned. And a week before our coordinator was leaving, he really wanted to get some videos from this trip. So instead of just taking some photos and some really bad iPhones, we already had a contract out with What Took You So Long. And this guy, Chris Casares, was able to fly in and meet the team in Toledo. And I worked closely with him on some of the storyboarding and essentially just saying, hey, we need really short videos around these engagements, less than 90 seconds. And we want it branded, but we want to just very clear about how we're engaging with the private sector and why it's important for more businesses to understand the opportunities that exist if they want to do business in Africa. So from that.
Yeah, let's go ahead and watch it.
Do we have to share screen here?
Why don't you share the link first?
right, and then hit that, yeah.
Yep.
All right, here we go.
Again, in Africa, we have already done some work and historically done work for numerous countries, primarily in East Africa.
So what opportunities do you see from Power Africa?
I see a lot of opportunity for you to help us identify markets.
Nice.
And let me just maybe go to the next one real quick, and then
Yeah,
we can talk about it.
The link.
Yeah. So we're just going to show you one more part of a series of videos from this summer, Power Africa's Roadshow.
15 kV duct for high power at 36 kV. What does that mean in English? It's 36,000 volts. So that's right, it runs at 15,000. K is 1,000. So we have different ratings. Like this one here, this is 600 volt. This will carry 4,000 amps because of the thickness of the bus. Simple as that.
I don't know. We're on right now. Huh?
Yep. So what lens and what camera did you use? Because you were clearly trying to show off the environment, but you know it had a cool stylized look.
Yeah. So a lot of that I wasn't even involved with this production actually.
Yeah.
I was from afar, so a lot of these questions I could definitely put you in touch with Chris, who was the guy shooting it. But I do kind of want to emphasize that videos are there are messages in videos that we should be really focused on distributing and communicating, and these obviously are how we're supporting U.S. manufacturers and U.S. businesses in this very tight budgetary climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was great. And like coming from these other people that that's so much more sincere and honest, you know, coming from those extra people. The idea is going to resonate so much more and speak to your audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Definitely. What was the, how long did it take to turn around those projects?
So Chris was, he flew in on Sunday and to Toledo, and then he turned around 5 videos in the matter of essentially every day. You would go back and just cut it up really quickly and then turn it around. And
just
so
one day per video?
Yeah, about that.
That's great. Yeah. That's another thing that can be a real challenge in the government, is to like get things done and, you know, turn it around really quickly, because it can take a while to get things done sometimes.
Get it cleared and then also move everything off your plate. So in this case, wasn't able to get down and shoot because too many other things, helping with support, doing congressional outreach, helping with press engagement, the social media distribution, all of that together on top of the videos, it would have been too much to try to shoot.
Yeah, but you know, this is a great example too of you being able to capitalize on a contract that was already in place, and you were able to utilize that to get more done and to accomplish more.
Absolutely, and also making sure that the boss is happy, and making sure when the videographer is able to work final editor, if that's in this case it's our coordinator, that the coordinator and the videographer have mind share, because so often we see where you shoot a bunch of work and then it has to go through numerous clearances from people far away from the experience and from the goal of that distribution, and then you can water something down what would have been a great work.
How were you able to facilitate that close relationship? Because I know a lot of people struggle with that too, is what, you know, they have these lofty ideas and they're excited about working with contractors or contracts that are in place, but sometimes their hands are tied or they can't collaborate just because of the restrictions of a contract. So were you able to kind of, you know, create more opportunities for people to collaborate and work closer together?
I think from my experience, this is the best that has ever worked, and it's primarily because you had the videographer, cinematographer, all one person in the car with the coordinator who is also the editor, and we're also capturing his engagement with a lot of these firms. So in the future, if you ever have the opportunity, making sure the principal who's going to be doing the final edits is in the car with the videographer for the week, that's the way to go. But that's kind of challenging to get to.
Yeah. So for anyone out there who is a core or who is, you know, spearheading the contract side of something like this, that will be a creative project, it's so critical that the person who's writing the contract keeps in mind that they need to collaborate with whoever the creative is from the federal side. They need, and if that's not written into the contract, then it's going to significantly reduce what you're able to accomplish. And yeah, I can't emphasize how important that is. I think anyone who's worked with a variety of contracts in the government, video contracts in particular, can testify to what I'm saying. But every once in a while, because I've been a part of some successful contracts too, and I've also been a part of some that have been challenging. And that's one thing that I'm constantly trying to do, is try to work with people who are writing contracts and working with them from the federal side to create opportunities, because the people on the contracting side too, they want to make great content and they want it to be successful and they want to be happy with the work that they're doing. They want to have a streamlined, you know, communication with the people that can help them get the job done. So it's so important. I can't emphasize that anymore. Yeah.
And I think understanding your audience is going to also shape that. I think making sure you know who you're going to be going with to shoot, but understanding who the end product is ultimately for. And I would always bring it back to the American people. So, I mean, I just read this, this, I guess, poll from Pew that said the trust in the US government right now is only 18% of Americans in Washington. Only 18% of Americans today say they can trust the government in Washington to do what is right. And 3% of the entire US population says, or excuse me, only 18% total of Americans say that they trust the government. That's ultimately what I'm trying to say. And in 1964, that was at a 77% high, and that's the high watermark. And the Pew started doing these polls probably in the late 1950s, early 60s. Now, of course, trust in government is associated with a lot of the political side, but us as government communicators, I think we are on the front lines of trying to tell the American people and communicate with the American people where their money is going to and why it should go there. And part of that is through doing videos, and the other part is making sure that we're creating content that is going to resonate, so that whether we're doing foreign policy in West Africa, or we're working on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, or supporting U.S. jobs and businesses through exports, we should really have that end consumer in mind. And if Congress can use these stories to also discuss with their constituents that's of why they're supporting it and why they're appropriating it, that's also a very valuable goal. And I would say just kind of the three messaging points with a lot of the work that we do in government communications is going to fall into one of three buckets. One, it's either going to resonate if it's national security, if it's economic, or humanitarian. And you can see that from if you're doing a SNAP program, there you can say there's an economic argument, or you can also say there's a humanitarian argument that we don't want children not to have health care in the US. And so those three messaging buckets are generally going to help us communicate internally of why we want to put out this content.
Mm-hmm. I think the number one thing that video can do better than other forms of content and media is connect with people emotionally. Mm-hmm. And when people don't trust something or they don't understand something, if it's an emotional decision for them, connecting with people through video can be a powerful way just to help them understand or kind of ease their nerves, or help them relate. And one struggle too within the government, coming from the federal side, when you're trying to create content, is the risk associated with creating videos about or featuring people, outside people, and getting the approval to include them, because you have to make sure they check out. You have to make sure that they're an okay person to feature on your website and represent your organization or speak for your organization. And there's a lot of risk with that. Yeah. But I think the trade-off is huge. And I think we only have the option to take that risk. And I know it can be hard for a lot of government people to take that leap and feature real people, like their audience, to speak those words and to share those stories. But at the end of the day, I think videos that feature real people and that are coming from the voice of those real people is going to be super important. A lot of people in government, it's unfortunate, get stuck only making videos about or featuring, including government people with scripted lines, and it's a really safe approval process. But that's not going to help with people trusting the government. It's not going to help with people, believing the government, or changing their opinion about the government, or understanding what their intentions are, or the impact that they have on people's lives all over the country. So I think it's tough for a lot of people, and we all have our different challenges. But I think we only have, one choice, and that's to take the risk.
I totally agree. And the video is, I agree, the best way to communicate the densest amount of information in the shortest amount of time. To do that, though, is to put together a tremendous orchestra where you're balancing all of the internal equities and interests and making sure that they at least can sign off on it, having someone who can drive that process through, having the contracting side, and then working on the creative content. And then that's just the internal. And I would say that's just a quarter of the resources that we should be putting into it, which for us is 100% of our time, most of the time, plus that. And our distribution, I think, constantly falls short as government communicators. We create some beautiful products, and it doesn't always get the legs that it needs. And a good rule of thumb that a friend of mine who's also in government communications is 75% you should spend on the distribution and 25% on the content creation. So
and that never happens in the government. And a big reason is because usually a lot of government agencies have restrictions around advertising or pushing their content out there for transparency reasons, and also just legal reasons, how you can spend that money. So yeah, that's another challenge I think people face all the time, is how do you overcome that obstacle? How do you utilize the resources that you have, the networks that you have? Because the government is also, the most widespread, the US government in particular is the most widespread network in the world. And it has a relationship with every other influential organization there is, pretty much. So it's a matter of making those connections and being proactive about it and trying to overcome those obstacles.
You just need to get universal legislation like the Department of Defense has to be able to promote everywhere always.
Yeah.
But even without that, we can find creative ways, I think, to work with key advocates who can help amplify. And if it is the targeted niche audiences, going out and giving talks about what our program is, how it is advancing U.S. policy, how it's supporting U.S. citizens through different programs. And a great way to do it is building a toolkit around that, having the video, having the talking points, having the slide deck, and really engaging the public or policymakers or Congress to be able to educate folks on what we're doing and why it's important.
Right. So creating the videos and keeping that in mind, that those videos are in fact tools to the people that you have relationships can use, that do have a larger platform that can distribute the content. They could use your content as a tool to share that message through their networks.
Absolutely.
Through their platform.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So, Jeremy, if you're there on the other side of DigitalGov, is there any way that we could see if anyone asked questions, or how does that work with this interface?
Well, so far there are no questions yet. But I just asked in the chat box if anybody has any questions. So if there are questions, please leave them in the chat box.
I can kind of run through too, as we wait for any questions to come through. Some of the points that we were talking about of, how to capture stories on these sensitive topics around human tragedy and hope. Like I said, kind of the most important is to understand the history of that situation, understand the context, do a lot of research on your own end. And then it's always about slow entry into a lot of these spaces as an outsider, and getting to know someone on a human level, eating with them. They're not just an object that you're trying to grab a story from and take with you, but to really sit and listen and create a lot of space so that you can understand what their story is and what they also want to discuss. And then working in challenging environments with limited infrastructure. I personally think that maps are really, really important. Being able to understand the city that you're going to be going to, the drive times, specific areas where there may be a historical marker. And then the people, whether it's the drivers, the fixers on the ground, the translators, and working with them to map out some of the scenes. Do you have anything to say with like working in challenging environments?
As far as like traveling and shoots and everything, plan. I mean, I think, whenever I'm doing a travel shoot, I try to break down the day as specific as possible and try to think of every obstacle that could come up, and I think of contingency plans too. But yeah, I mean, I don't travel internationally, so the only shoots that we've done are domestic and through different states. So it's not quite as complicated, but I've done a lot of traveling around the country, and I think I've got it pretty much down to a science. As far as the essentials that you'll bring with you on the flight, which are, like you said earlier, you would want to carry on everything that's 100% necessary. If you needed to go handheld with your camera with a few batteries and cards, or a microphone, or whatever the most important items are, you want to take those on the plane with you, and then you would check the items that aren't 100% necessary, that you could get away with, like your tripod or your light stands or a light. But yeah, you don't want to lose your camera, because you might not be able to buy that at a Best Buy, or like the special batteries that they take or something like that. So I try to plan and try to reduce the risk as much.
And building contingencies, like you said.
Yeah.
It's really important. We've talked a little bit about working through limited resources. I think, you know, finding the story, finding the character. And I took a short storytelling class from Media Storm based in New York, and getting good sound is essential. You can have beautiful visual, and if you don't have good sound or good audio with the interviews, it'll all go to pieces. And if you have really good sound, but the visuals may be a little wanting, you can still kind of carry and hang a story on that audio.
Like your first example.
Yeah, exactly.
If you didn't have sound, any sound of your B-roll, what would you have had to edit with? It would have been just the sound of your interviews, of your voiceover. Yeah, and so Nat Pops, you can get so creative with editing with natural sound, and even adding in some sound effects, making sure that it does sound natural, or utilizing your own stylistic elements. If you use like slow motion or something like that, adding a little more sound design. But yeah, sound can definitely take an edit to the next level, for sure.
And we've talked about distribution. I really do think that communicating to the U.S. people should be one of our main focuses, and then also Congress as the representatives of those people should be some of the focuses on who we should be educating about what our programs and policies are that we're implementing. And then tips and tricks of moving a story through bureaucracy. We did talk about this as well. And I think really making sure you have the latest org chart, and being able to understand who are all the players within that clearance that you're going to need to think of ahead of time, and giving them a heads up, and getting their buy-in at the earliest possible creation of the storyboard and of the pre-production. And then know the larger context. I find a lot of folks working on these projects, and they're so far removed from the policy of why they have a project or why they even have gotten funding from the project, that they can lose sight of that. So I think really understand the context of the policy and the program that you're communicating. And then even in internal communications, making sure that everyone who's maybe touched that or is going to be around that project and program in the future is also within the USG able to engage with that video. We have a couple questions.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people who would like to advocate for doing more ambitious video projects in their agency?
Yeah, I think first get with your legislative and your public affairs folks and create a content pitch. I think the last video you did with Steve, he talks about a concept pitch, one-pager, and maybe he could share that even, and making sure that the right folks who can benefit from pushing out the story get their buy-in, and then you'll have them as advocates.
Yeah, so I think when you're pitching an idea, there's a number of different ways you can pitch, and it really depends on who you're pitching to and the context and everything. It's going to determine what information is included and how you would deliver that. But I think ultimately, at the end of the day, on a basic level, if you're not doing anything, or maybe you're doing video on a very small scale, or you'd like to take it to the next level, I think providing examples is really important, especially for people who don't understand video. Finding examples of something that people can relate to and understand. So thinking about something successful that another government agency has done, and I would connect with those people like through like the Video Production Pros community or something like that, where you can actually talk to the people who produced the content and spearheaded it, and pick their brain about why it was successful and how they were able to accomplish what they did accomplish and what their return on their investment was. Because if you can bring that back to your people and you can use that as an example and that as evidence, I think that's going to be a lot more, it's a lot more powerful pitch. And it's something that they can relate to. They can see a clear example of. And then also not just sharing an idea, but sharing a plan. People and you want to make it as simple as possible. And that can be one of the most difficult things, is how do you present an idea that's doable, that's realistic, and explain it to someone how you would execute it, the scope of the project, defining the scope of the project. How do you communicate that to someone who isn't used to, who doesn't understand it, who's not familiar with it? That can be really challenging. But there's a lot of other people out there that can help you, a lot of people in the government, at other agencies that are more than willing to give advice. And I just encourage you to reach out, ask people, ask for help, and then put yourself out there. Go for it. Ask for the money, because if you believe that you can enhance your mission, or you can accomplish more through video or using different vehicles to do that, you owe it to the American people to present that. And I know it can be scary sometimes because video can be expensive, but video time and time again has proven to be some of the most effective and efficient ways to communicate. So it very well may be worth the investment. So I encourage you to take the leap and do that, and do the research, ask people, pretty much.
And get on the Video Production Pros if you're not already on it.
Yeah. There's a lot of great people out there, a lot of inspiring work, like Evan. Met Evan on through the community. He shared his work, and one of the things that I thought was really impressive that caught my eye about Evan was just the overall design of the website and the simplicity, and how different that is than most government websites. And I know how challenging that can be to get something like that approved, a project that's that big, to get that approved. So yeah, one person wanted to know how did you build the website? What's
Yeah, so this was through our digital team and legislative public affairs for USAID, and within that they were working with a contractor. I think it was one of the big marketing PR firms, where we had a blanket purchase agreement, a BPA, and that got it started. And then they have a internal team of website gurus who can keep the code moving. So that's essentially, it was a big purchase to get it up there, and then the maintenance is all internal as well. And the video and website should be 508 compliant. So if it's not, we need to get that done right away, ASAP.
Yeah.
For the next question.
So our website design and just our graphic design package and illustration flat design is very different. Or, I mean, I guess it's similar in some ways to the stuff that you guys have. But the overall website structure and layout is much different on our website. And one thing that I've always encouraged is like trying to pursue a more story-like journey through the webpage, thinking about it like that, with using more visual elements, because with finances you have so much information. And our website is massive, and it has tons of different angles and information that you're trying to get out there. We're constantly trying to make it more simple, and a big part of that too is connecting with people and getting people to understand these complicated financial concepts. So I've actually used your website and a couple others in the government as examples. Even though they may seem a little extreme to like our web people, they look at that and they're like, oh my God, that is radically different than anything we've done. We can't do that. But, actually we've, there's a new website that the one team is building, and I was really excited to see that it's starting to incorporate that more journey-like structure, where you scroll and you have more of a full page experience as you scroll through the page. It's more based on visual elements. Right now it's still a flat design, but it's taking on some of those same ideas. So hopefully down the road we can incorporate photography and video as elements within that journey as well.
Huge fan of Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Had some bad incidents with a mortgage once, and I was threatening them, and they solved it really quick once I brought up the name of the bureau. So that's just a personal aside. I see we're at 1 o'clock, but I also want to just shout out, Bryce, you're doing a great job with the earlier point of just doing better as government communicators and stepping up our game to try to inform citizens and bringing together a group with best practices. and all the folks in the Federal Communications Network and DigitalGov as well. These are platforms, and almost every government communicator I meet really have that mission-driven approach that they want to do great work, and they want to work for the U.S. people. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right.
Cool.
I'll let you go.
All right.
Thanks for the time.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.